Summer, 1944. Japanese prisoners of war arrived by truck at a dusty farm in the American Midwest. Expecting stern guards or male overseers, they were met instead by women in work clothes, their sleeves rolled up, hands on their hips. The prisoners froze. Back in Japan, women were confined to homes, expected to be silent, obedient, invisible in public life. Here, American women stood at the gates, issuing instructions with confidence. One POW's diary captured the shock. A woman, no older than my wife, pointed to the tools and gave us orders. Her voice was firm. We obeyed without thinking. In Japan, such a thing would have been unthinkable. The guards made no correction. They treated the women's authority as natural, unquestionable. For the prisoners, it was a humiliation deeper than defeat in battle. The women assigned each prisoner a task: harvesting corn, tending livestock, hauling water. Their tone was practical, brisk, and without fear. These were not timid wives. They were commanders of their land. One soldier whispered bitterly to another, "Have we fallen so low that women rule over us?" Yet his comrade only nodded, sweat already pouring from his brow under the weight of a hay bale. The POWs quickly learned that these women were not exceptions. Across America, with husbands and sons overseas, women had stepped into roles once reserved for men. They drove tractors, repaired fences, and managed accounts. The Japanese soldiers, trained to see women as fragile, struggled with the sight. One diary confessed, "She carried buckets heavier than I could lift." I felt shame, not from her strength, but from my weakness. The humiliation was compounded by the fact that the women showed no cruelty. They did not mock or threaten. They simply gave orders, calm, clear, and firm, and expected obedience. A guard later noted, "The POWs seemed more unsettled by the women than by us." To take commands from a farmer's wife seemed to cut deeper than barbed wire. The men obeyed, but inside, the shock burned. America's women were not hidden, not silent, not weak. They worked, commanded, and laughed freely. For the POWs, this first encounter was more than cultural difference. It was the first crack in their understanding of gender, power, and the enemy's society. And as the days passed, the women's authority would only become more visible, challenging everything the Japanese believed about war, work, and respect. The shock had only begun. The next morning, the Japanese prisoners lined up at the farm fields again. They expected perhaps a man to arrive and take over. Instead, the same women were waiting, already working before sunrise. One held the reins of a tractor, steering it across the rows with precision. Another stacked hay bales higher than a man's shoulders. Children carried baskets of vegetables, helping without hesitation. The POWs could only stare. In Japan, women rarely touched heavy tools. Here, they seemed to command the land itself. A diary recorded, "She swung the axe into a log, splitting it in one blow." My pride fell with the wood. We had thought ourselves the strong warriors of Asia, yet these women humbled us without lifting a sword. The guards encouraged the women, addressing them with respect. They laughed together, working as equals. To the Japanese, this was more shocking than any battlefield defeat. One soldier whispered bitterly, "If our wives spoke like this, we would silence them." Here, the men listened. The prisoners were ordered to carry feed to the livestock. A young woman no older than 20 pointed to the sacks, her tone sharp but polite. Without hesitation, the POWs lifted them, following her instructions. A guard later noted, "The Japanese did not resist the women's orders. They obeyed, but their faces betrayed them: confusion, shame, disbelief. The women never wavered. They corrected mistakes firmly, praised good work, and scolded laziness. Their authority was absolute, not because of force, but because of competence. One POW reflected, "We were taught that women must be protected, hidden, kept from labor. But here the women were the labor. They kept the nation alive while their men fought abroad." As the hours passed, the prisoners realized the shocking truth. American women did not wait passively for the war to end. They fought it in their own way, through work, discipline, and command of the farms. And the POWs, stripped of their pride, found themselves the servants of these women. Each order carried a humiliation sharper than captivity itself. But in that humiliation was revelation. America's strength was not only in its soldiers, it was in its women, unafraid to take charge when the nation needed them most. The lesson was impossible to ignore. As the days passed, the Japanese POWs noticed something that unsettled them more than the women's strength. It was their confidence. American women gave orders without fear, without apology, as if authority belonged naturally to them. One farmer's wife strode into the barn, pointed at two prisoners, and said sharply, "Stack that hay higher. Careful, or it'll fall." Her tone was brisk, commanding. The men obeyed, lowering their eyes. In Japan, such a command from a woman would have been unthinkable. Here, no one questioned it. Not the guards, not the farmers, not even the children watching nearby. A POW's diary reflected. She looked directly at me, her eyes steady, her words firm. I had faced officers with less authority. I felt smaller before her than before any man. The women corrected mistakes quickly. If a prisoner worked too slowly, they clapped their hands, demanding more speed. If a tool was misused, they snatched it back, demonstrating the right way before handing it over again. What shocked the POWs most was the absence of fear. These women were surrounded by enemy soldiers, yet they treated them like farmhands, not threats. A guard once joked to a farmer's wife, "Aren't you afraid giving them orders?" She laughed and replied, "Why?" "They're just men with hands like ours," the POWs overheard. Their pride cut deeper than the barbed wire fences. For Japanese soldiers raised to see women as delicate, this casual confidence was a humiliation they could not hide. One whispered to his comrade, "We lost the war the moment we saw this." Yet alongside shame grew a strange respect. The POWs could not deny the women's competence, their steadiness, their courage. A prisoner later admitted, "In their eyes, we were not warriors, only workers." And in that truth, I felt defeated more than on any battlefield. The women's authority was not loud or cruel. It was natural, unshakable, as if born from necessity. America had demanded they lead, and they had risen to the task. The Japanese POWs realized that their captors' strength extended far beyond their armies. Even in absence, America's men were replaced by women who commanded with equal power. The humiliation deepened. If women in America could lead without fear, what else could this nation achieve? The answer terrified them. And soon they would learn that this confidence was not confined to farms. It echoed across factories, schools, and the very heart of American life. For the Japanese POWs, the farm work was already a shock. But on days when they were transported past nearby towns, they witnessed something even more unsettling. Women at work in factories, shops, and offices. In Japan, women were hidden from public life, confined to homes, expected to remain silent. Yet here, American women filled the streets, walking with confidence, carrying briefcases, riding bicycles, even driving trucks. One POW recalled, "I saw a woman in trousers step from a factory. She carried a lunch pail, grease on her hands, a smile on her face. I thought, surely this is a dream. In Japan, such a sight would cause scandal. The factories roared with activity. Women loaded crates, assembled machines, and carried out jobs once reserved for men. Guards explained simply, "While the men fight, the women build." The POWs sat in stunned silence. Their propaganda had told them America was decadent, collapsing, weak. Instead, they saw women powering the engines of industry. A diary captured the moment. "We believed women to be fragile flowers. Here they are, iron, feeding their families, supplying their armies, keeping their nation alive." Even in small towns, the evidence was everywhere. Women worked as shopkeepers, bus drivers, and clerks. They managed accounts, handled tools, and ordered men about without hesitation. One prisoner whispered bitterly, "If our women worked like this, Japan would never starve." His comrade answered softly, "But our leaders would never allow it." The POWs realized that America's power came not only from its soldiers, but from its unity. Every man, woman, and child contributed. No one was idle. Even prisoners were put to work, their labor woven into the fabric of the nation. For Japanese soldiers, raised in a culture where hierarchy and gender were rigid, the sight was crushing. One diary confessed, "The war was lost not on the battlefield, but in these factories." For even the women of America are soldiers in their own way. Some POWs began to admire the women's determination, though they would never say it aloud. Others sank into shame, realizing that America's strength had already outgrown them. The revelation was devastating. If American women could command farms and factories with such ease, then what future awaited Japan, where half the population was silenced? The prisoners looked at the smokestacks, at the endless activity, and understood. America's women were not waiting for victory. They were building it. And soon the POWs would face the most humiliating experience yet. Not watching women work from afar, but receiving direct commands from them in the fields, day after day. By midsummer, the Japanese POWs had settled into a routine of farm labor. Yet every morning, the sting of humiliation returned when American women arrived to give them their orders. The women's voices carried across the fields, sharp and confident. "You two, cut faster. Stack those bales properly. Don't waste the seed." Commands spoken not as requests, but as orders. In Japan, a soldier would never bow to a woman. Yet here, warriors of the emperor bent their backs under her direction. One POW confessed bitterly in his diary, "I felt the shame burn inside me. I obeyed because I had no choice, but in truth, I obeyed because she expected it. Her certainty left me powerless. The guards did nothing to intervene." To them, the women's authority was natural, unquestionable. For the prisoners, this lack of resistance was the deepest humiliation. Everyone accepted the women's power except them. Some prisoners tried to resist in small ways, working slower, muttering insults under their breath. But the women noticed, corrected, and pushed harder. Their discipline was unshakable. A guard later remarked, "The POWs were less afraid of us than of disappointing the women." Strange, isn't it? But it broke them faster than a whip. The humiliation grew when the women worked alongside them. They lifted, carried, and sweated under the sun, often outpacing the men. The prisoners could not deny their strength. One soldier whispered to his comrade, "We once called them weak. Yet here, we are the weak ones." The shame was worse than hunger, worse than captivity. Every order, every task completed under a woman's watchful eye, chipped away at their pride as soldiers of Japan. And yet, beneath the humiliation, some began to sense a strange respect. These women had not chosen this war, yet they carried it on their shoulders without complaint. A POW's reflection years later revealed the depth of the moment. We lost twice, once to America's soldiers, and once to its women. The second defeat cut deeper. The humiliation of obedience was complete. What they had been taught since childhood, that women were silent, submissive, fragile, was shattered in the dust of American farms. And soon the prisoners would see that these women were not only commanding them in fields, they were shaping the next generation of America through their children, who stunned the POWs even more. On Sundays, the Japanese POWs sometimes worked near the farmhouses. It was there they encountered another shock. American children, running freely, laughing loudly, and working confidently alongside their mothers. The prisoners watched in silence as boys, barely teenagers, carried water buckets heavier than a soldier's pack. Girls drove wagons across the fields, their hair tied back, their movements quick and sure. One POW's diary revealed the sting. A boy of 12 stood taller than me. His arms were thick, his stride powerful. I thought him a man until his mother called, and he answered with a child's voice. The women did not shield their children from labor. Instead, they instructed them with the same firmness they used on the prisoners. The children obeyed, not in fear, but in pride, eager to prove themselves. For the Japanese, this was unthinkable. In their homeland, children were frail, their bodies thinned by rationing, their lives overshadowed by war. Here, children were strong, healthy, and filled with confidence. A guard laughed once as a young girl scolded a prisoner for stacking hay incorrectly. "She'll be running this farm in a few years," he said. The POWs lowered their eyes, ashamed at being corrected by a child. The humiliation was doubled by envy. These children were the proof of America's future, taller, stronger, healthier than Japanese soldiers themselves. One POW wrote with despair, "We thought we were the warriors of destiny. Yet even their children outmatched us. The women raised them to be giants while ours starved." The prisoners realized then that America's strength was not only in its factories or its armies, it was in its families. The women commanded not only farms but futures. Even the smallest gestures deepened the shock. A boy tossed a ball to his sister. She caught it effortlessly, laughing. The POWs exchanged glances. This simple play displayed strength their own youth had never known. The lesson became impossible to ignore. If America's women could raise such children while their husbands fought overseas, then Japan's war was already lost, not only in the present, but in generations to come. One prisoner concluded in his diary, "Their women command today, their children tomorrow. We will never catch them." The shock of strong women was no longer just humiliation. It was prophecy. And it would only deepen as the prisoners learned that these women and children thrived not by chance, but by design, through a society that valued freedom, discipline, and equality. By late summer, the Japanese POWs had stopped waiting for the men to return. They finally understood. The women's authority on farms, in towns, and in families was not a temporary arrangement. It was part of America itself. They watched as guards treated women with respect, calling them ma'am, listening to their instructions, even stepping aside when they spoke. To the POWs, this was a world turned upside down. One diary captured the shock. A woman spoke to a guard as if his equal. He nodded, not angered, not insulted. In Japan, such a thing would have been punished. Here, it was normal. The POWs realized that freedom in America was not just for men. It extended to women and children as well. This was equality they had never seen in their homeland. On one farm, a wife argued with her husband about the day's work. The POWs braced themselves for anger. Instead, the husband shrugged, nodded, and followed her suggestion. The prisoners stared in disbelief. A guard later explained casually, "Here, everyone has a say." That's how we do things for the Japanese, raised in a rigid hierarchy where orders flowed downward only. It was incomprehensible. The humiliation deepened when they realized that this equality did not weaken America. It strengthened it. Families worked together, shared responsibility, and adapted quickly to wartime needs. One POW admitted bitterly, "We silenced half our people. They empowered them. Now their women fight the war as surely as their men. Every day on the farms reinforced this truth. Women managed accounts, commanded labor, and made decisions openly. Children learned from their example. It was not rebellion, it was the rhythm of American life." The POWs began to see the larger picture. America's strength came not only from the weapons and factories, but from its people's freedom to act, speak, and lead, regardless of gender. A diary from one soldier summed it up. "We believed equality made a nation weak. But here I saw it gave them endless strength. Women worked. Children grew strong. Men fought. All together they built victory. The revelation struck harder than defeat on the battlefield. America's culture itself was the true weapon. One Japan could never match while it silenced half its population." And soon the POWs would face a final humiliation, realizing that these women, who ordered them in fields and farms, represented not weakness, but the very reason America would win the war. It was a truth they could never escape. By autumn 1944, the Japanese POWs had grown used to farm life. Yet the sting of humiliation never faded. Each day they took orders from American women, and each day a piece of their pride as soldiers of the emperor crumbled. They had once marched across Asia, believing themselves chosen warriors, heirs to the samurai. Now they shoveled manure, harvested corn, and carried feed under the command of women who laughed at their clumsiness. One prisoner admitted in his diary, "I was defeated, not by bombs or bullets, but by the voice of a woman telling me to work faster." The humiliation grew sharper when the women corrected them openly. If a prisoner stacked hay poorly, the farmer's wife barked orders, demonstrating how to do it properly. The guards chuckled, unbothered. The POWs burned with shame. A guard wrote in his report, "The Japanese seem most humiliated when women scold them. They take it harder than punishment from us." The prisoners could not fight back. They obeyed silently, their pride breaking with every task. Some whispered among themselves that this was worse than combat. It was dishonor stretched out day after day. Yet even as their pride broke, a strange recognition began to grow. These women were not weak. They were strong, decisive, and unafraid. Their authority came not from rank, but from necessity and competence. One soldier confessed years later, "When I lifted a sack of grain under a woman's command, I realized Japan was already defeated." A nation that allowed women such strength could not be conquered. The breaking of pride was more than personal humiliation. It was cultural collapse. Everything they had been taught about gender, order, and strength had been overturned by women in dusty fields thousands of miles from Tokyo. And the POWs knew this truth would haunt them long after the war ended. For how could they return home and look their wives in the eyes, knowing that women in America had commanded them like soldiers? A diary captured the despair. "My sword was taken in battle. My pride was taken on a farm." For the Japanese POWs, the breaking of pride was complete. They were no longer warriors, not even prisoners. They were servants of women in a nation they once thought decadent. And yet this humiliation carried a lesson that would shape their understanding of America forever. Soon, they would realize that the authority of American women was not an accident of war, but a permanent part of the society that had defeated them. By the final months of their captivity, the Japanese POWs stopped expecting the return of American men to reclaim authority. The women's command over farms, families, and daily life was not temporary. It was permanent. They overheard guards speaking proudly of their wives and sisters. "She keeps the farm running better than I ever did. When I come home, she may not give it back." The guards laughed, but to the POWs it was unsettling. One prisoner wrote in his diary, "In Japan, when a man leaves for war, the house falls silent. Here it grows louder. Women take his place and do not falter." The POWs realized that America's strength came not only from soldiers and factories, but from a society where every citizen, man, woman, or child, was expected to contribute. Factories did not stop when men left. Fields did not go barren. Children did not starve. The women carried the weight, and the nation did not stumble. A guard explained simply, "This is America. We all pull our share. That's why we'll win." For the Japanese, this was a revelation as sharp as any defeat on the battlefield. One POW reflected, "We thought women weakened a nation. Instead, they doubled its strength. In our arrogance, we silenced them. In their freedom, America raised them as equals." The lesson was bitter. Every day of captivity proved it further. American women's authority was not a fluke of wartime. It was part of the culture, woven into family, work, and community. And this permanence frightened the POWs more than America's weapons. If the enemy could unleash the strength of both men and women, how could Japan's rigid hierarchy ever compete? One soldier's final entry captured the despair. "We bowed to women on American soil. One day our sons will bow as well, for this power cannot be undone." The prisoners understood that they were not only witnessing a temporary shift, but a transformation of society itself, one that would shape the future world. The shock was no longer just humiliation. It was recognition of a truth too vast to ignore. America's women were as vital to victory as its armies, and that realization left the POWs with a final, haunting question. Had they ever truly understood what strength meant at all? The answer would come as they prepared to return home, carrying memories of women who had broken their pride and revealed a new kind of power. 2916. When the war ended, Japanese POWs boarded ships back across the Pacific. They carried few belongings, letters, small carvings, Red Cross parcels, but the true weight they bore was memory. They had seen America's wealth, its endless food, its powerful machines. Yet what unsettled them most was not factories or weapons. It was women, American women, who had given them orders without hesitation. One veteran confessed in an interview decades later, "I do not remember the face of my guard. I remember the face of the farmer's wife who told me to stack hay straighter. Her voice still echoes in my ears." Returning to Japan, they found a country where women remained silent, where homes were broken and children starved. The contrast was unbearable. They had obeyed women abroad, while their own wives at home had no such authority. A diary captured the bitterness. "We returned to ruins, to women bowed by tradition. Yet in America, women stood tall, commanding men like us. I wondered if this too was why we lost the war." Historians would later call it a cultural shock deeper than battlefield defeat. The POWs had discovered that America's strength did not rest only in soldiers, but in the freedom and power granted to its women. For many, the memory carried shame. They had been warriors of the emperor, yet they had bowed to farmers' wives. But with shame came recognition. The authority of women had given America a strength Japan could never match. One prisoner admitted years later, "We thought women weakened a nation. Instead, they doubled its power. That truth broke us more than any bomb." Even decades after the war, those who had labored in American fields spoke of it with awe and disbelief. They had expected cruelty, hunger, humiliation. Instead, they were fed, kept clean, and commanded by women who never flinched. The memory blurred the line between defeat and revelation. They had lost not only to America's armies, but to its way of life, a society where women were not hidden, but central. A historian summarized, "Japanese POWs could never forget the shock of American women giving them orders. It revealed a truth larger than war itself, that the strength of a nation rests in all its people, not only its men." For the prisoners of war, that lesson never faded. In captivity, they had learned what their homeland had denied, that true power was shared power, and freedom was the foundation of strength. And so, the voice of the American farm woman, sharp and steady, remained with them until their last days, a reminder that they had been conquered not only by soldiers, but by women with calloused hands and unshakable authority. It was a lesson never forgotten.